surface about the truth. There's something mundane about truth, about worldly truth, and what the meaning of the surface or the mundane is found in that it conveys, it communicates something other than itself. So the surface appearance, image is the words that Balthasar is sort of using here, right? The image is, in one sense, in itself, like void of depth. It sort of has to be void of its own essence. Otherwise, it becomes its own reality, and then it ceases to be an image, and it just becomes the reality itself. So the image, the surface, has to sort of strangely be able to metaphorically border on like not being, border on the side of transience, on the side of the I don't know if you want to call it the surface level, if it's going to be the case that it can communicate something more than it. And this is somewhat paradoxical, meaning like there's like you're sort of saying two things. Towards the end of the reading, this is the way that Balthasar sort of puts it, is that you have these two poles, and you kind of find yourself between these two poles, and these poles occur at different in different orders or in different domains, right? There's the you could think of it like perception and intellect. You could think of it as substance and accident, image and essence, interior, exterior. And I think what he's trying to do here is he's trying to say that truth is found, and we've seen this already a little bit earlier on in the work, but truth is found in between these in a way. That it's not simply found in the reality or the substance itself or the interior itself or whatever, but truth is precisely in its, right, going back to that idea of truth as like knowability, communicability, reality as communicated. Therefore, it has to like be an in itself, which is also at the same time for another. It's got to be this betweenness between the inner and the outer, and it can't be decided in either of those. Okay, and so this is what I think, going to that meditation I just read from, I think it was from Reflection on Matthew, or I forget where that was in here, Mark, chapter 4. And the parable is a way of communicating through images, and it's not merely that these images are to be understood and then you leave them beyond. You like let them go and you think like, okay, now I got the purpose of this, and I'm going to understand the truth of this apart from the parable itself. I think what Balthasar is trying to say about what truth is that it necessitates having the act of communication, the act of revelation, the act of disclosure always be the beginning and the end of knowability. So you don't ever, in a sense, leave the image behind. You don't ever leave the act of disclosure behind and say, okay, now I got what was disclosed, and the act of disclosure is like to be done away with, because the act of disclosure is constitutive of what was being disclosed, right? So if you want to think about it in terms of like so the whole context once again is within love, and so if you want to think about what knowledge is as the act of communicating and the reception of communication, it's a type of giving, the object giving itself to the subject receiving the object, and you can never think of that in terms of having been completed, because once you do that, you're now no longer thinking of it in terms of like the active role and the actively passive role of it, and therefore you're not really thinking of it within the context of truth. You're thinking of it as something that's already been fully established, fully accomplished. Another way to put this is there's never a perfect way to explain something, such that some articulation is sufficient to convey all the meaning that is contained in that thing. Filling that in, I guess, you understand what someone is saying only with the context of the trajectory of the conversation or of the discussion, right? So if you just take, this is why when people sometimes ask, what's the meaning of this line of the passage? And then this is understandable, I do this too, but then they'll just quote a single line, like, let me see if I can find a short one in here. There's probably no short ones, because I think this was written in German. If it were a mere becoming, a constant flux, it would no longer be truth, but would be one of the same as the inessential transitoriness of the images. And you think, like, what the hell does that mean? I think taken in itself like that, it doesn't really have a meaning. Like, the point, the meaning of that sentence is not to be found in itself. I mean, like it's to be found in this trajectory that this whole book is attempting to convey. And same thing with, like, even on a more concrete way, just a single word. What does Balthasar mean by outside on the top of this page, right? Now, the meaning of a single word, you could think of it in like an abstracted context, but that's not the way that we use words. We use words, like the word outside here doesn't mean literally like, out in the garden or whatever, right? Like the words that you use always get their meaning from the context, and that context is not to be understood as a static accomplishment, but it's to be understood as an attempt to communicate a certain meaning, a certain idea, a certain truth, which is ultimately the communication of the reality, right, of one. And so I think that's like what's essential about like parables is that you don't have ears to hear them or eyes to see if you don't understand that these are only to be understood in light of like a trajectory. So if you don't really understand this broader context of like the life of Christ and the other parables and the other things he's done, the parable itself isn't going to mean anything. All right, it's like, so what if a mustard seed is so small? Right. This is I think what's unique about the fact that you can hear things and you think you understand them, and then later on in life you mature a little bit and you realize, like, I had no freaking clue what that meant. I thought I did, but I didn't. And that's an occurrence that happens over and over and over again. That the things that we think are perfectly, comprehensible, perfectly articulable, are, only thought that way because you get a little glimmer of understanding, of comprehension in it, and what likely happens, and this is what the fact of age will do to you, is that you realize that wasn't the full story, and this sometimes leads people to be jaded because you think like, oh, it turns out there is no full story, because what I thought was left me high and dry, and so now it turns out like truth isn't really something I can get my hands on. I can just get my hands on opinion or something like that, because everything that I think is the case turns out to only be like a partial piece of the picture. But I think what Balthasar is trying to say is, no, that's the very medium of truth, or the very location of truth is in that movement, and that's why this whole chapter is references truth as a mystery, because it's something which you come to know precisely as a mystery. It's not like truth. There are these mysteries, and truth is this thing that undoes the mystery, that uncovers the mystery, that negates the mystery. I think the point of truth is the communication of the mystery of being. And you communicate truth in various ways, and we can talk about the various ways you communicate it. Sometimes you communicate it in very determined, precise, univocal discourse, and that is a communication of truth. But sometimes truth is communicated in not precise, not univocal, and maybe even not even like conceptual, in the sense of, as he talked about the symphony, right, or the piece of music. There's something that's conveyed in that, something is communicated in that, but it's not like conceptual content. You get something when you listen, and don't just listen, but you sort of understand a symphony. You get something, but you don't get conceptual content. And so I think the whole point of this chapter is to show that truth, when it's understood, is an intensification of the mystery of being. It's like a knowing of the mystery of being as a mystery, rather than an undoing of it. And it's typically this attitude we have. Once again, going back to, and probably even goes back prior to Descartes, but Descartes' discourse, thinking about the masters and possessors of nature, right? That it, like, existence turns out not to be something that we can ever fully, quote, get and perfectly, circumscribe in our conceptual grips. It's always going to elude us in a way, and that's precisely the way in which you come to know reality, is that it eludes, right? It exceeds, and that's the way that it's known. So it's not so much that it's an occasion of ignorance. It's an occasion of an actual knowledge of truth, but it's the knowledge of truth as mystery. Okay, so I think that's like if you could follow that, that's sort of the context, I think, of this chapter as a whole, and filling in some of those details. And I think that's why he begins by referencing some aspects of like parable, and the mundane, the everyday seems so simple that there must be something deeper, and you like kind of always think that there must be something deeper here, because this is just too simple for this to be all there is. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, comments about any of these pages? Anything from here? There are a lot of pages for today, so I know there's a lot maybe to talk about. But yeah.
So, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding this, but this has been kind of throughout the entirety of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that like truth has to be like in the middle.
Yeah.
Right? In between like the object and the subject.
Uh-huh.
To a degree I understand that, but to a degree that seems problematic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I still don't see how we're truly knowing the thing, if that makes sense. Because like he can say that the thing, like the object, unveils itself, right,
mm-hmm.
to me, the subject. But I still have to know the object, or else I'm like I feel like being in the middle, solely being in the middle, and he talks about it kind of at the beginning where he says it can't be idealism and it can't be the other rationalism.
Right.
But I don't see how truth isn't just an abstract concept that doesn't eventually become idealism if that makes sense. If we're not specifically saying that what the object is revealing to me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm knowing about the object, not just about the appearance.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what he's trying to do in this chapter, maybe more so than in the previous ones, is link up the appearance with that which appears, the appearing one. So the appearance, put it in terms of accidents and substance, I guess. Sort of in classical logic, when you say, this, I don't know. Let's just sort of keep it vague. This chair is black. The subject. So that proposition is true if the subject and the predicate sort of overlap. If there's like an identity between the subject and the predicate. So the thing that is the chair and the thing that is black are in one sense identical. They're one and the same. That's what the is means. Is a sort of identity. What type of identity that can be spelled out. But there's a sort of identity between the subject and the object, the chair and the thing that's black. Now there's also a distinction between the chair and the thing that's black because of if there weren't, all propositions would just be tautologies. They wouldn't actually really mean anything. You would just be saying the chair is the chair. So there's a way in which there has to be something about the chair being black, which is like it's like two facts made one, and we call the one, like, the thing that's black is really not like a substantial thing. It's like an accidental predication. We're talking about something in an accidental way. So the relation between the accident and the substance is such that, like, you really are encountering an accidental being. You're seeing, experiencing something through its accidents, through how it presents itself, how it manifests itself, how it discloses itself. This is just the technical terms of the secondary acts of the thing, right? So you come to know the substance only through these secondary acts, which aren't the thing. I mean, this is what's so paradoxical about this, and what I think what he's trying to say is so mysterious about this is these accidents aren't the substance. And if they were the substance, then they wouldn't be these accidental ways of manifesting. And so there's something necessary about the substance needing to present itself through or by way of its accidental qualities. You can't come to the essence of something except through those accidental qualities. So you know the essence, you know the thing, the substance, only by way of the accidents. And so I think this is sort of strange, but also sort of intelligible. We kind of understand this. And what we try to do when we understand the essence, we kind of want to abstract away the accidents. Okay, let's think about what an animal is. What's the real essence of an animal? And you sort of abstract away particular color, and you abstract away, particular size. And when you're doing that, you're kind of removing yourself from reality in a way. it's a way of actually coming. I mean, this is why there's something paradoxical about this. You're stepping back from reality, only so that you can better understand not some like abstracted essence thing that's like completely apart from what's being seen, but it's this way of stepping back or abstracting, so that you can better understand what really it is that you're looking at, what it is that's really red that's before you, and so there really is, and there has to be a unity between the substance and the accidents, a real unity between the two. And if there wasn't that unity, then you wouldn't really have a substance there. Like you can't have a dog there unless you have color. This is why there's a way in which the dog like depends on color. It's gotta disclose itself in some way, and if it doesn't disclose itself in some particular way, then it's not a dog. It doesn't exist. So somehow the as the way Balthasar puts it is the dog. This is all once again metaphorical. The dog must. What's the term he uses? Trying to think of the word he uses. I won't be able to look it up because it'll take too long. It must like condescend. That might be the word he uses. I don't know. It must condescend. It must let itself go. It must give up, in a sense, its universality. Real dogs, the essence of a dog is for the sake of like the existence of dogs, right? And so, in a way, the universal must somehow. This is all metaphorical. Forsake its universality for the existence of the particular, and because without the particular there wouldn't be the universal, and so somehow like the universal dog is capable of existing only in the admission of consigning itself, resigning itself, forfeiting itself, handing itself over to particularity. You can only have the universal dog if there are, we can call them diminished universals, which are particulars. I mean, you could call it diminished, a forsaken universal or something like that. It's let go of its universality, and it's particularized. It's become accidental now. It's taken on all these concrete specifications, and it's lost, in one sense, quote, lost its universality in that very fact. But miraculously, paradoxically, that's precisely what allows it to exist as a universal, is in that particularity, in a way that doesn't reduce it to particularity. Okay, so there's this like intimate union between substance and accident in such a way that you can only come to the substance through the accidents, and the substance sort of, in order for it to exist, it must not just I guess I have to take on accidents, but the accidents are the expression, the term he uses is the expression of the substance. It's how the substance expresses itself. Like, you can think of it as like an interior that's like folded itself outwards, and it's like what interiority looks like in an external way. It's kind of like the relation of soul and body. Body is like the physical showing or the physical manifestation of the soul, in a way, so that there's like a real union between the two, so that in a way you can see the soul. You see the soul in the body. It's like the body is sort of the physical, visual appearance of the soul, the life of the individual, right? There's this intimate union. Okay, so all that is occurring in like the metaphysical ontological arena, and what Balthasar is trying to do is point out that cognitively, epistemically, there needs to be something that mirrors that ontological fact or union or reality, right? The substance accident union without collapsing the distinction, that is something that can be known only if the mind, or we'll just call it the mind, is able to mirror, in a way. It sort of takes what's happening in the object, and there's some aspect or some iteration of that in the subject itself, so that what's happening in the object in some ways is capable of being retraced in the subject. So when you look at this thing out here in the world that's like substance, accident, unified, you, in the subject of that, the knower, you're both seeing something and you're understanding something. There's like two things happening. There's a perception and there's an understanding, and those two aspects. We saw this sort of in Kant, but it's kind of getting reworked a little bit here. Those two aspects aren't opposed to each other. So like, oh, I'm just going to look at the object now. I don't want to understand it. I just want to perceive it. And you say, okay, no, forget perception. That's for like stupid animals. I want to know the object. Throw perception off to the side and just know it. You realize, like, just as on the side of the object you can't have substance bare of accidents, or accidents, bare of substance. You have to have that sort of union, but one sort of consigned to the other and forfeiting itself in the other, and all that we talked about. There needs to be something akin to that in the subject's knowledge of that thing, so that you kind of retrace in a way that the perception is, the sensory perception is tied up with understanding, in a way that to understand you kind of need to condescend to the level of seeing, and what you're seeing is always what's going to be understood. So you're kind of seeing something more than you see, right? That's what's crazy about perception. You see just accidents, but yet you see something more than just accidents. You see a substance, but you don't see substance pure and straightforward. Like, it's not like you look at the world and all of a sudden these like little essence beams come into your head, and it says, okay, we're going to present ourselves to knowers not through colors, not through sounds. We're going to present ourselves knowers directly through essence. That would be a sort of like hyper naive realism, I think, that like you come to know the essence regardless of accidents. It would be like, only if we could just get rid of our sensation, then we could really know the essence of things, because then it wouldn't be mingled or mixed up with accidents. And I think what Balthasar is saying is that's a fool's hope. That's like a complete irrational way of approaching the world, because of the very fact that the objects aren't these brute essences. The act of knowing essences can't be or come by way of anything other than what would correspond to accidents in the knower, and what corresponds to accidents in the knower are images. And so this is, I mean, I don't know enough. I'm trying to like bridge this with Thomistic metaphysics, but I don't really know the ins and outs of Thomistic metaphysics and Aristotelian metaphysics and all this. I'm just sort of an ignorant nobody. But this is like the role of like phantasm, or the role of imagination, is very central, because it's like it's the unification of the accident. It's like the last thing that the chair says of itself, like sends off colors, right? And the first thing that I receive of the chair, so that this is like the intuition in like the Kantian sense, right? The first thing I receive of the chair is its color, right? It's this thing that is just like this image. I receive in a way an image, but the image is not just a void image. It's an image that is like a communication of something. And so I think what Balthasar is trying to do is he's trying to go, and this is like a long way of getting to your question, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, when you know something, you are simultaneously knowing something which is internal and external. It has to be because there's no there's no void. It's like you're knowing something which is presented and made sense of to you, but it precisely in it being made sense of to you, it's a making sense of the other thing. Putting it in another context, when you use words, which are just sounds, somehow you're making sense of those sounds is a making sense of what that other person is saying to you. You're trying to understand it, but you're trying to understand what they know, what they are speaking, what they are communicating. And so it's like a shared knowledge. It's a shared truth. And that's why we say words, is because we're trying to share something. There's something external that is being internalized, but by being properly internalized and properly understood and received, it becomes an understanding not of just, here's what I want to think about this, here's what I want to make sense of this, but it really is an attempt to understand what's really out there. But you can only understand what's really out there by understanding how it is, like, and this is the very end, what he's saying here, how you're trying to be faithful to it. You're trying to be, I can say things and people can misinterpret them. And people can deliberately misinterpret them because I don't speak very clearly and I ramble and all this. And so I can say things and you can misinterpret them. And if you're looking for a good justification on something, I don't know, you could find words that I say and easily misinterpret them and say, well, you said this. But a lot of people know, and especially kids know deep down, that they're being dishonest. They're in how they're understanding this. They're simply trying to take what's being spoken and use it in a way. And they're not being honest with the object itself. And I think what's required in the knower is akin to what's required in the speaker. Just as there's an ethical obligation not to lie, not to present yourself falsely, there is an ethical obligation, although he hints at this at the very end, to listen, to be faithful. There's an ethical obligation to be faithful to a speaker. You're doing an injustice to someone if you don't hear them faithfully, if you don't hear them properly. Just as it would be wrong to sort of deceive someone with words, it would be wrong to hear someone in a deceptive way. And so I think the whole point of this epistemology metaphysics sort of combo is to show that this between is in a sense both fully something that I as subject have within me, but it's also fully in the subject. So that there's not a dichotomy. It's not okay, this person. Let's use the conversation example. This is probably better. We've gotten very used to conversation, so much so that it's second nature, that we don't always stop to think about what's happening. You almost assume that when you understand something, although this doesn't happen in philosophy context, because very rarely do you ever really think you really understand something. But suppose you're talking with your friends about where to eat for lunch or something like that. There's so much of you're speaking mind to mind, heart to heart, that it's almost there's not this inner world that this person has, and there's this inner world that you have, and you're trying to bridge the gap and okay, am I understanding what they're saying? Are they speaking adequately or correctly? In most contexts outside of philosophy classrooms, you just like are so like confirmed in the fact that you are of one mind that it doesn't really occur to you to ask a lot of these questions that Balthasar is asking. And I think he's going to say that's like actually a paradigm. That's like that's a better instance of what he means by truth than philosophy classrooms, because we're trying really hard to communicate, and a lot of times we fail in difficult contexts, and because we're talking about difficult depths. We're sort of plumbing depths that we haven't gone before, and so it's hard to be of one mind on that. And I think this is. I mean, rather than thinking like the world is entirely in my head or the world is entirely out there, I think what he's saying is what all this reveals is what's entirely in your head is what's entirely out there, because there's just one shared world. There's not like it's like an inner, which is an inner only because it's like externalized. It's an internal that's externalized, and what the external is then it's an external that is interiorized. And so these like go hand in hand, and that's what constitutes the fact that there's one truth. There's not like the subjective truth and then there's the objective truth. They in fact are one and the same, and it becomes, this goes back to stuff. I don't want to rehash what we were talking about at the beginning of the book, but you can talk about like the potential, just as there are things that can be seen that aren't actually seen. They're still seeable, even though they're not actually seen. But they don't surmount to the height of the visual status. They don't get up to the heights of visual nature until they're actually seen. Likewise with truth, there's an objective truth, but it doesn't achieve its objective truthfulness. What truth means, what the purpose of truth is to be known, and so it's always knowable whether it's known or not known, but it doesn't achieve its height of truthfulness unless it's actually actively known. And so in some sense, the external is always going to be there, it's going to be true, but it becomes most fully realized as an external truth when it's known by a subject to be an external truth. And so it's not like it's a knowing, okay, now I've received it and it's an internal truth. It's a knowing it, and this goes back to the end of, I think it was chapter, I'm going to forget this now. Actually, chapter 1, end of chapter 1. It's a knowing of the other as other, and not of oneself. And so that's what avoids subjective knowledge from being a subjectivism. It's a subjective knowledge of the other as other, which I don't know if that makes sense. So I think this is, he's really trying to get a shared world, a shared truth. There's only, in a sense, one truth, which is shared between the interior and the exterior, which is shared between the essence and the appearance, or the essence and the image. There's one truth in both those. It's not like there's the truth of images and then there's the truth of essences, or there's the truth of substance and then there's the truth of accidents. There's ultimately one truth, and they're kind of found in each other. The substance needs the accidents, and the accidents needs the substance in order for knowability to happen. In order for knowledge to happen, you need substance and you need accidents. You can't have one or the other. I think is what he's trying to say. And then likewise, that's the relationship between essence and image is the same sort of thing. I don't know. Maybe I spoke long enough so that I made you like get too tired.
No.
I was lulling you to sleep with my words.
So I could have been I think I did misunderstand what he was saying. So he is saying that we can know the thing in itself,
Mm-hmm.
but that comes about in the context of our perception of the accidents working with our understanding in order to grasp the substance of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, he uses, so the height of this, and this is something that I'll have to dig this up. So somewhere Aquinas talks about person as like the height, the paradigm of being. So you have like this ladder of being in a way, and person is at the height, and it has to do with inner subjectivity. Actually, we talked about the degrees of being as dealing with degrees of interiority, and I think building on that, you can recognize, I think, inner subjectivity is going to be like the height of action, because it's the way of that two interiors. You're able to share your interiority with another, and this only happens in the fullest sense with persons. But the problem with friendships, the problem with marriage, the problem with dealing with other human beings is the fact that you can't crack them open. I can't like look at Joe and like see his thoughts. He can speak his thoughts, but even when he speaks his thoughts, sometimes I have to trust that he's speaking honestly. Sometimes Joe's far more articulate than I am, but all right, sometimes we don't use words carefully or adequately, or the content we're trying to talk about is of such a depth that there isn't a clean, easy way to talk about it, and so you have to use metaphor and simile and all that, sort of poetic stuff. And we recognize that, like in other persons, there's that depth. And when you have a conversation with them, you realize that you have to be content with the fact that you can only receive what they're willing to give of themselves. You can't like make a conversation happen. I can make a conversation happen with like an ant, in the sense that like the ant, whether it wants to or not, is going to be perfectly like open to my scientific examination of it as a living being, right? I can study it as a living being, whether it's willing to undergo that, or it doesn't sign a consent form, right, prior to that that experiment. You don't have to get consent. The ant doesn't have to willingly give itself over. Its interiority is necessitated in its external actions. But with a person, they can shut down and they can hold their interiority, their inner life, to themselves, and they don't have to give it up, right? Their color is being necessitated by the very fact that they're physical. Maybe they're making sounds. Maybe you can hear their stomach rumbling and all that sort of stuff. But what's really, their meaning, what's really going on in their existence is something they can hold on to. They don't have to let that go. And I think this is why inner subjectivity reveals something more. There's a more profound truth that can be seen in inner subjectivity, because of the fact that you recognize you have to follow the lead of the other, right? If you're going to know someone, you have to hang on the words that they say. Hang on and not just like physical or like auditory words, but their body language, everything, where they're going, why they said this, how the trajectory of the conversation's going, and you have to be attentive to the individual and sort of be receptive of everything that they're saying. In a sense, they call the shots. That's the only access you have into that interiority. And so I think that's where you see that, like, the very heart of truth, then of truth knowing, is this attempt to better understand this mystery. And you recognize that in the person there's like this mystery that you're trying to better understand, and you can understand them more the more that they hand themselves over. But it's not like, okay, now this person's less of a mystery. The more that someone opens themselves up, the more of the fact that they're a mystery, like the fact that they are a mystery and why they're a mystery, it becomes apparent. Right? It's like before anyone says anything, they're such a simple person. They're so easy to understand when they don't say anything. But it's once they start rambling and talking, you're like, holy smokes, you are a crazy person. That's what people think of me. So, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather have my craziness, something that I can let go of rather than have it held inside. So we're all crazy. It's just some people like to hold their craziness inside. Okay, so I think like that shows that there's something necessarily subjective in knowing of another person, right? It's like this inner subjectivity, so that it's not so much that you're knowing an object. It's like you're knowing another subject. It's just turns out that what other objects are is they're not perfect subjects. The chair is not a perfect subject. It doesn't have that perfect interiority. So really, knowledge isn't subject knowing an object. It's more like subject knowing an object that's a subject, and therefore it's a type of objectivity that is perfectly, at the height of it all. It's personal. It's inner subjectivity. The language that chairs speak is not human discourse, but they do speak a language, as according to Balthasar, and this is why, I mean, even following Thomistic metaphysics, being is described as communicatio, communication. It's a being communicates itself, and therefore it's like right. It's all being is linguistic, and it just turns out that some things speak higher languages than other things. And we can try to translate, this is something he also talked about, we can try to translate some languages into other languages, but it's always going to come at an expense that we might lose something, right? You try to take something that's communicated through a particular medium, like a piece of music, and you try to explain what that means as a work of art using like an essay format. If I say, okay, Jake, explain what that cheese means to you. And you're like, I can't do that. I can't put it into words. You can like talk about its smoky, sharpy sort of taste. I don't know. But the idea is like we recognize that you can't adequately translate from some languages to other language. The language of cheese is unrepeatable. The language of Mozart, likewise unrepeatable. You can. I think this is the point he's making. You can paraphrase, but no matter how many adjectives you use, how many words you use, you can never explain the same truth that is revealed in a Mozart symphony. No matter how good you are at using words, right? You just can't do it. And I think that highlights that what you're knowing is really something you can never get your hands on. And the reason we want to get our hands on it is because we want to know how much further it exceeds our abilities to get our hands on. I mean, that's this great paradox of knowledge, which I think he's kind of just riffing on like a Socratic approach to this, which is it's a knowledge that always propels one into a greater ignorance or wonder of what one has seen, what one has known. Right. So it's a knowledge that always leads to something more. And that's that happens in the context of essence, but also I think one of the things he's pointing out is it happens in the context of existence, where we take for granted existence every day, but the very things that we take for granted, each individual one is the full communication of the infinite generosity of God, right? Such that this coffee thermos, which is dear to my heart, is just in the fact of its existence, just as revelatory of an infinite God as I am, as my children are. Right? It's not like my children convey more in regards to existence, right? The infinite generosity of God than this coffee thermos does. And in a sense, this is something really crazy. The coffee thermos might actually convey the infinite generosity of God more than my children, because my children are so important, right? They're far more important than a coffee thermos, right? That the coffee thermos is far down on the spectrum of what counts for a good world. And so it's almost like it's so unnecessary that we have coffee thermoses and we have ants and we have all this variety of trees. But by that very fact, it seems that their existence can be seen as just pure gratuity, pure like, this is unnecessary, this doesn't need to exist. And therefore, it conveys more about God's generosity than all these things that seem more necessary. My children seem more necessary to the existence of a good world than the thermos, and therefore the thermos seems more, or can be seen as more gratuitous by that fact. It doesn't need to be, right? It doesn't have to be, and so I think both in the context of essence and in the context of existence, I think Balthasar is trying to say that you can see communication, right? You can see truth, and now you can't separate existence and essence, but we can do that in a. I mean, you can't separate it. There is a distinction, but there's not a distinction that you have essences that don't exist. Right? That would be incoherent. Okay, so I think all of the world is. Revelatory. It's revelation. And that's what it's basically saying. That's truth. Being is truth, right? This is to understand what the transcendental truth means. Is everything is revelation. Everything is revelatory of something. Accidents are revelatory of something. Substance, interestingly, it's revelatory in the very fact of its existence. It has to engage in secondary actions. It's got to do something. It's got to act. It's got to reveal its essence, and it does that through secondary actions, through accidents. But what it is to exist is, in that sense, to be true. It's to be knowable. It's to be revelatory. Comments, thoughts, questions about any of this stuff? Yes.
Do you think it's safe to say that Balthasar is a phenomenologist?
I don't think anything's safe. I don't go outside. Nothing is safe. Yeah, I don't know if he would simply classify himself as a phenomenologist, but I think he does engage in phenomenological reflection. So to that extent, he's a phenomenologist. You could probably throw in a bunch of adjectives. I think, in a sense, he would consider himself a Thomist of sorts, but I don't think he would be happy saying that he's just straight up a Thomist. But I think he's drawing on the phenomenological tradition pretty heavily in this work. Yeah.
And going off that too, everything seems just reminds me of Trinitarian theology. So it seems that asked a question about like truth being in between things, and is Balthasar kind of getting at like truth being the thing that lives, like subjects and objects?
Yeah.
Kind of like in the Trinity.
Yeah, like the spirit of truth. Something like that, to use a phrase. Yeah.
As the Father like knows the Son.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Son knows the
Yeah.
Father, then
Yeah.
makes them one.
Yeah, and then what does Jesus say to Philip? Is it Philip? This is why I don't teach Bible stuff. What did Jesus say to Philip?
You've seen the Father.
Yeah, like, how long have you been with me, and you don't know that he who's seen me has seen the Father? Yeah, I think this is not the central. Well, it is. Here's an instance of the exact thing. This is the central focus of this book, but it's the focus which is like that second focus. This is like a parable. It's like the natural, metaphysical, logical, epistemological parable of Trinitarian theology, which is why this is the first volume of his Theo-Logic. So the next two volumes 2 and 3, deal with taking this application of what we understand truth in the worldly, creaturely sense to be, to show that the very fact that we can know things at all seems to reveal something about God in Himself. Like it's a type of revelation of God, which we would never probably have ever seen were God not to reveal Himself in a unique way. But once He reveals Himself in that unique, special way, it becomes possible to see that logic, so to speak, the Trinitarian logic in all things. The image of God is all around, which we may not have seen were it not to be revealed in a special way. Yeah. So I do think he's setting up a Trinitarian theology, let's just call it theology, that lets you understand the relationships between the persons within the context of truth as not being one where the Father is separate from the Son, even though distinct from the Son, and somehow they're distinct both because they're in each other, and they both, in a sense, mean the same thing in a way. Right. So I think he's taking this creaturely logic or creaturely truth, and he's eventually going to show how that's a participation in divine truth. So that the structures here are images, parables of the paradigm. I think that's what it is. And that's why knowledge ultimately, this is the big to do about love, that it becomes the paradigm of knowledge. Truth is most fundamentally to be understood in terms of love. Let me just read this. This is actually really good. This is towards the very end. So not the last paragraph, not the second to last, not the third to last, but the fourth to last paragraph. I know, about midway in, and then we'll call it quits. Okay. In the end, it is forced to utter its whole existence, its inmost essence, in deeds, right? In actions, right? Love, in a sense, essence must utter its existence in action, indeed. The subject's life thus becomes the proof of its assertion. Life shows what weight its truth actually had. And in fact, the truth that it has pronounced comes to the perfection of truth only through this testimony of life. In this way, a lover can profess his love, but whether his oath is whether his oath is not believed, or whether he himself feels compelled to demonstrate its truth, he will, as time goes on, adduce his whole life and all his actions as evidence of his assertion. And so, if his first declaration was really true, direct his life according to the norm of truth. Love, therefore, shows itself more in works than in words, because works are the gravity of its words. Without proof, through the deed, not only would love's word be not fully credible, but the lover himself would not really have exhibited or uttered his love. He would not have had the chance to unveil his own hidden mystery and make visible its power, depth, and fullness. The response to such an existential proof can only be a firm, certain faith. This faith is knowledge. And he goes on to talk about how there's not an opposition between knowledge and faith, and in fact, the one kind of perfects the other and intensifies the other. Knowledge actually strengthens faith. It doesn't do away with it. It sort of strengthens it in a way. Okay, so I think another way to put all this, and we can go, is that to speak words. The issue isn't the words. The point isn't the words themselves, right? But you can't get to the point except through the words. So it's this paradoxical thing that what you're trying to do is something that doesn't depend on words, but you need to make it depend on something. And so it turns out that the way that the human does this is in words, right? We communicate we communicate, we act. We are human precisely by being language animals, logos bearers, animals with logos, animals with reason, rational animals. That's like the technical Greek term back in Aristotle. The animals with logos is like what makes us distinctly the things that we are. And so it's not merely that language is like the thing that we do. It's like what makes us human. Right? It's kind of accidental in a way, in one sense. And we don't have to say certain words or say these words or that words. But to be human, we have to use some words. Right, and so it's this unique way of making sounds make more sense than they would otherwise be. Right,